Okay, let's dive right in. We're looking at a brilliantly sharp 1923 satirical novel called The War and the Idiot. And honestly, it completely dismantles everything we think we know about military history. Written by Maximilian Vorenstoff and Claude Sébastien Schweik, this book flips the whole traditional narrative of glorious warfare totally on its head. So instead of sweeping epics about tactical mastery, we get a story where the outcome of a massive continental war is decided by mud, gross incompetence, and, well, the pursuit of a really good sausage. It's a fascinating, hilarious, and deeply cynical look at how the history books usually get it all wrong.
The authors immediately reject this idea that history is driven by genius commanders or some inherent courage of nations. Instead, they argue that what really moves humanity is primal, animal necessity. The preface of the novel basically states that the true engine of history isn't found in the fancy, gilded headquarters of field marshals. No, it's found in the desperate needs of everyday people. We're talking hunger, cold, the urgent need for dry socks, and the endless quest for a decent meal.
And that forces us to pause and ask ourselves a pretty radical question. What really decides the fate of empires? We're so trained to think that grand campaigns are the product of immense human will. But, this novel suggests they're actually just the chaotic, totally unpredictable result of thousands of terrified men trying to survive terrible conditions. The authors are basically challenging us to look past the painted cathedral ceilings of victorious generals and look down into the mud of the trenches.
We see this exact concept weaponized by the novel's antagonist, or maybe just its biggest fool, Field Marshal Count Vissarion. Vissarion is a guy who reads terrible tactical decisions as profound spiritual victories. I mean, when he gets indigestion from his breakfast, he literally interprets it as the spirit of the age moving through his digestive tract to prepare him for greatness. He uses all these abstract philosophical buzzwords to justify what are, on the ground, catastrophic leadership failures that lead to perfectly avoidable mass casualties.
And this creates the core whiplash of the entire novel. The authors constantly bounce us between two completely different realities. On one hand, you have the abstract delusion of Count Vissarion, sitting in a carpeted tent miles away from the fighting, moving wooden blocks on a map and spouting off about the spiritual geometry of warfare. But then right on the heels of that, we see the grounded, brutal reality of Corporal Pavel, a veteran soldier literally waist-deep in swamp water that tastes like regret, watching his men die just because of some arbitrary lines drawn on that exact map.
Let's look at how this actually plays out on the ground for Corporal Pavel. He gets an order to hold his position because of its quote-unquote natural defensive advantages. But his reality? It's an absolute nightmare. He's stuck in a trench dug at the lowest possible point in a 5-mile radius, meaning it's constantly flooding. His clear field of fire is pointing the completely wrong way, the enemy is actively flanking them, and to top the whole thing off, he's taking orders from a brand new lieutenant who literally thinks the military term enfilade is a type of pastry. Actually, scratch that. It's beyond a nightmare. It's a perfect storm of geographical and bureaucratic stupidity.
Meanwhile, back at headquarters, the disconnect grows even worse. Vissarion decides his army needs to cross a massive, unmapped marsh to outflank the enemy. And when his own staff points out that men literally cannot cross a swamp and are already drowning just trying to scout the thing, Vissarion completely ignores physical reality. He delivers this incredible line, framing a disastrous marsh crossing as a metaphysical gateway and declaring that impossibility is just a bourgeois prejudice. He genuinely believes that if history demands it, the mud is simply going to stop being mud.
I really want you to let this number sink in for a second. 1,500. That is the exact number of men Vissarion loses during just the morning of the marsh crossing. Not to a glorious battle, not in some strategic masterstroke, but lost to drowning, enemy artillery they couldn't run from, and pure, unadulterated geographical stupidity. All because a general pointed at a blue smudge on a map and called it a flanking route.
And conversely, this is the number of tactical gains achieved by that massive sacrifice. 0. Zilch. The surviving men, including Corporal Pavel, end up pinned down in a ditch on the other side, completely cut off. But how does Vissarion interpret this disaster? Well, he instantly rebrands it in his official reports as an investment in strategic positioning. It's a chillingly hilarious look at how catastrophic failure is just spun into victory by the guys who don't have to suffer the consequences.
Cutting through all this tragedy and high command nonsense, we finally meet our third protagonist, Bohumil. Bohumil is the idiot of the title, though the novel makes a really strong case that he might actually be the only sane man on the continent. He wasn't even supposed to be in the army. He was accidentally conscripted while he was just walking down the road trying to return a borrowed wheelbarrow to his neighbor.
Now, what's incredibly ironic here is that Bohumil's total ignorance of grand strategy actually makes him the absolute most successful soldier in the entire army. Just look at this timeline. On day 1, he's drafted by mistake. On day 3, during that horrific marsh crossing where hundreds of guys are dying, he somehow wanders onto a dry patch, bumps into a confused enemy soldier, and casually shares a tin of Romanian sardines with him while artillery's literally falling around them. By day 5, driven entirely by his stomach, he accidentally bypasses the entire enemy front line.
And while the high command is back in their fancy tents drafting up these incredibly complex, suicidal maneuvers to secure supply lines, Bohumil executes a flawless solo infiltration using this beautifully simple 3-step plan. He literally beats up an enemy soldier with a cold sausage, borrows his gray coat, walks straight into the coalition supply depot looking like he absolutely belongs there, fills a sack with cheese and salted pork, and just walks out. His utter disregard for military protocol makes him practically invisible to it.
Back in the realm of grand strategy, having learned absolutely zero lessons from the Marsh disaster, Vissarion decides the army has to execute Operation Northern Sword. He orders Corporal Pavel and his battered survivors, who, by the way, have just barely made it back alive and got demoted for their trouble, to undertake a completely unsupported, totally suicidal 40-mile march straight through enemy lines. They're told to wear stolen coats, hit multiple targets exactly on time, and just figure out how to survive using their initiative. It's a plan that is completely, 100% detached from reality.
The spectacular irony of this whole story becomes super clear when you lay out these outcomes side by side. Basically, the more a character cares about military strategy, the worse they fare. Vissarion wants to reshape the spiritual landscape of Europe, and what does he get? Mass death and a completely stalled front. Corporal Pavel just wants to survive a flooded hole in the ground, and he gets demoted just for living through it. But Bohumil, the guy who only cares about his stomach and his neighbor's wheelbarrow, he accidentally achieves total operational success, acquiring cheese, bread, and some truly excellent sausages.
Bohumil perfectly sums up the deadpan thesis of the whole novel right before he secures one of those sausages from an incredibly confused coalition officer in the enemy's own mess tent. He just walks right in, asks for a sausage, and when the officer starts demanding to know if he understands who he's talking to, Bohumil just looks at him and replies that hunger simply does not care about rank. It's this hilarious, profound moment where basic human need just completely overrides the artificial hierarchy of war.
So, what is our ultimate takeaway from this brilliant piece of satire? Well, it's a very real and pretty tragic truth. History isn't shaped by the gilt edges of a field marshal's map or the philosophical musings of guys sitting in safe, dry tents. It's shaped by the grounded, desperate, and often absurd reality of the people who are actually forced to walk through the mud. This whole story is a giant flashing warning sign about the danger of treating human lives as abstract concepts.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to take a look at the structures around you today. Think about your workplace, society, or the government. Think about the decisions being made from the top down, and ask yourself this final, provocative question. When you look at modern leadership, who is safely reading the map, and who is the one forced to stand out there in the mud? Keep that in mind the next time you're handed a grand strategy that seems to completely ignore reality. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.